Buenos dias, everyone, and welcome back to the Metropolitan Culture Corner after our summer break. We start off the 2024 fall season with an interview with film producer and visual artist Mara Adina. Born in Transylvania, Romania, she now splits her time between London and Barcelona. Together with her older sister, director Ilinca Calugareanu, she started the film and documentary production company Vernon Films in 2012. Their primary focus has been to push the boundaries of hybrid filmmaking and collaborate with creative voices who seek to discover new ways of telling a story. Her film projects have been screened at major film festivals around the globe, including Sundance and the Clermont Ferrand International Film Festival, on streaming platforms such as Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, and of course in theaters around the world. And the one thing that all of these films have in common is that they are unique stories that deserve to be told. Aside from her success in the world of cinema, Mara is also an abstract painter. Her canvases are an explosion of color that leave no one indifferent. Mara's first solo exhibition was here in Barcelona this past spring, titled Feel with Abandon, and included 7 large canvases and 15 smaller works. But rather than continue to tell you about her, I'd rather introduce you to the lady herself. Please welcome Mara Adina to the Metropolitan Culture Corner.
I want to live in a world where art is for everyone and by everyone, and it isn't just gate-kept behind whoever can afford, $1,000 here for that course and another $500 there for that course and another $600 for this, or whoever can go to a big university. I don't want to live in that world. That would be a really sad, sad world. I just would like to live in a place where anyone who wants to live this sort of beautiful life of just living in creative practice has access to information on how they might be able to do that, and a life with more creative expression would be a beautiful life for all of us. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Before we start talking about your painting and your more recent work, I wanted to kind of begin at the beginning and talk about your film production. You started out studying fine art, but then kind of put that on the back burner to work in film in 2005 and started working as a production manager and line producer at Kuwait National Television, which is maybe not the most straight line path to becoming a painter. So how did you start out working there, and what was that experience like?
Oh boy, to go so far back, it feels like another life. Maybe I'll go a little bit further back to connect the dots a little bit. So my father's a mathematician, my mother's an artist. So I grew up in this sort of landscape of creating, of making, I guess really looking up to people who followed their own path and made things happen. So I ended up in the Middle East when I was a teenager. I sort of finished my school there. I went to English school. My father was teaching mathematics there at the university. He was invited to lecture there. And then I went to university. At that point, I still thought that I would be an artist and that was my path. And then in the final years of school, I sort of dabbled a little bit into acting. And then when I went to university, I actually started on an acting course. So for 1 year, I was on an acting course. And in that last year, I was introduced to filmmaking, and we had a unit of introduction into filmmaking. And I just remembered being blown away by the amount of departments involved in making films and the amount of people. And I just became a sponge and was so excited by really the teamwork of it. I think there was a part of me instinctually that kind of felt, now looking back, that I wasn't ready for such a solitary life. And I became really attracted to the idea of working in a team. So I ended up switching courses. I studied film at Bournemouth Arts Institute. And after that, I wanted to start a production company, hence how I ended up back in the Middle East, where I worked at the Kuwait Television, primarily TV work there. But really that sort of expedition was all about putting some money aside to start my company, to buy some equipment and make my first film. And I produced a fiction feature. That was my very first venture into producing, which is insane. I had no experience. I did not start with a short film. Probably would have been better for my calmness. But anyways, that was my path. It was a baptism by fire, and I'm so grateful for it. And I really caught the bug. I mean, that was the beginning of what ended up being a 15-year career. And from that film, I went to my second one, which was Chuck Norris versus Communism. And that was my first sort of international success. It premiered at Sundance Film Festival, played in cinemas all over the world, and went on Netflix. Yeah, it was a really crazy beginning to a career. Normally people like sort of step from one thing to another. For us, it was just like this rare moment of really feeling like like we arrived, and we just kept making films. And from London, I ended up in Los Angeles, and then I can sort of talk a little bit about the transition into painting.
After working with these Middle Eastern production companies, was it always the idea to go back to the UK and start a production company with your sister?
Initially, it was me and what was then a partner. We got together at university. We were in a relationship together, and we started the company together, and my sister sort of joined, and then slowly he decided he didn't want to make films anymore, and it just became me and my sister. And yeah.
And the film projects that you have worked on, you mentioned Chuck Norris versus Communism and Celluloid Dreams, for example, were the two that I really love the stories behind. What is it about those ideas, or any idea, that really grabs your imagination and inspired you to decide, we want to invest in this, we want to make this film? Because there's lots of good stories out there, but how do you tell the difference between something you think will resonate and something that won't?
Great question. And also hard question. I think for me, for us, it was always instinctual. There was just a feeling of immediately falling in love with the character or the story, and just feeling like I wanted to know more. Because really what you enter into is a 4-year relationship. It's very rarely less than 4 years to make a feature. So initially it's a love story. It's just this feeling of, you read something or you hear about a character, and me and Ilinca, my sister, we would start talking about it. She directed, I produced, and it would get us so fired up. And there was just this sense, almost like a certainty of, this is what we need to do next. And I think that very first film that we made together was really falling in love with the lead character, this wild story of a woman who dubbed hundreds of videotapes in the times of communism in Romania. And she was the one voice who did all of the dubbings of all these films. And an entire generation grew up taking in media just with one woman's voice. And we needed to know who she was, how this happened, how it was allowed to go on by the system, even though it was highly illegal and you could have ended up in prison or worse. So really it's just like this flurry of questions opens up when a story like that comes along. And there's this other story that we did in New York about an ex-NYPD policeman, and we found it in an article, and I remember both me and Ilinca were reading it at the same time, and we sort of peered over our computers at the same time, and it was just like, who is this guy? Like, we need to find out. It's almost like once that bug or that feeling takes over, you can't think about anything else. And the process of exploration and unearthing the story and who these people are begins. And there's been a couple of times when we found something and then realized, okay, that it doesn't maybe have legs, the story doesn't have the depth that we would have thought. And that's when you know that, okay, this can't be a feature, this can't be a film. But for the most part, there's some kind of guiding instinct, I think, that ends up leading you towards characters. And I don't know what that is. What is that? The gods of art? Who knows? It's not for me to decide, I suppose.
But I think it's very interesting that you were able to find, it happens to be your sister, which is an amazing thing, but it's interesting if you could find anybody who you guys have the same vision.
And that also happened so on its own and naturally. It's not like we grew up together and we spoke about, oh, we're going to become filmmakers. It was nothing like that. It was me sort of getting to it in this very organic kind of way, and then her getting into editing in this very organic kind of way. She studied visual anthropology, and then we sort of came together. In the very first film that I produced, she edited, and then she had the idea for this one and she directed, and then that was it. It was just like this natural progression where two people became ready to do that work. And then the magical thing is that we were ready at the right time to also be together and work together and build something together. As an artist yourself, whereas it's incredibly joyful and beautiful and magical, it is a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of no after no after no. I think out of 300 things that you try with something, one will work out. And developing that thick skin to stay out of the result and simply being in the process and trusting that something will work out because the project is meant to come to life, and not stopping until it does. I realize now, sort of looking back, that that is a very sort of special set of circumstances that a person needs to have. And I don't know if it's blind madness or but we definitely brought that out in each other.
It's great that you mentioned that, because a lot of people who may be in the position of just beginning their career path, people don't realize how many times you get rejected in the path to success, and then you got to start all over again with your next project. It's a lot of work, for sure. For some people, the dream would be a successful production career in film and television. So you achieve that, you and your sister achieved this together, and then you decide to eventually come back to painting. So what happened there?
It was, again, a journey of feeling things out. The transition transition started during the pandemic, I think, but maybe in some ways it began a little bit before that. There was sort of this feeling building inside of me, some sort of a disappointment in the industry as a whole, which has become so highly commercial. And also both on the foundation side and on the broadcasting side, on the buyer side, everything is very much curated and managed by the people who have the money, who own the corporations. Doing meaningful work that feels creative and exciting and engaging and that is pushing the boundaries is becoming harder and harder. And I had so many directors that I wanted to work with who were becoming very disillusioned with this side of the industry, of wanting to push the boundaries, to do really creative work, to do controversial work, and it almost never getting funded and it becoming such an uphill battle. I mean, we were making the projects that we wanted to make. It was difficult, but we managed to put the financing together and we were doing well. I think it was just like this feeling, it was somewhere in the back of my mind and it was getting bigger and stronger. And then the pandemic happened and things just slowed down. We had a very big project in post-production at that point, and we were very, very, very privileged to not be affected by that moment. It wasn't really a huge catastrophe for us from that point of view, but it also meant that it gave me a lot of time, and myself and my partner moved to the desert just outside of Los Angeles in the middle of nowhere. And our neighbors were like 20 kilometers away, and we were just in this really beautiful place in the middle of nature, and I found myself with more time, and I was sort of grabbing hold of even more time out of that time that I had carved out for myself, and I was filling it all with painting. And it was something that initially it felt like it was part of my, if you like, my spiritual practice or my like emotional practice. I do a lot of yoga, I do a lot of meditation, and the painting was part of that. And then we ended up moving to Barcelona, and again when we landed here I just kept painting, and I found myself like stealing more and more time from the production company and parceling it off into painting. And I think after about a year of being here, I had to look at what was going on and make the hard, honest decision that I'm not happy making films anymore. And that was terrifying. It was a terrifying conclusion to come to, because this was my identity. It was who I was. Most people would just be, are you completely insane? Almost everyone in this little space of yours, why would you do this? And in some ways it did feel like very scary, but at the same time, the same thing kept repeating in my mind, like, what makes you happy? What makes you happy? And then the answer was everyday painting. And I think that, coupled with a very sort of big life change that began about 5 years ago, has helped me transition into a life where the most important thing for me at the moment is just living honestly. And living honestly has to be about everything. It has to be about what I do, how I do it, why I do it, who are the people in my life, what are my relationships for, and a constant reevaluation of those things. So I made the hard decision to do this.
I think that will resonate with a lot of people, what you said. Some people say that it's some paradigm shift in the world. Some people say it's just a direct result from the pandemic and an inevitable result of a global event like that people are reevaluating what they want to do with the time they have in their life, So, and why abstract art specifically? If you'd studied fine art, it's a different way of approaching a discipline, I suppose is the word I was looking for.
Yeah. So yes, I was classically trained, and there are portions of that practice that are still very much alive in what I do at the moment. And the show that I'm working on will also include sculptural elements and video work. I think for me, my sort of visual art now is coming very much from a place of grappling with this meta crisis that we're all in, whether it's like environmental, political, war, all the conflict, all the things that are broken and shattered in the world that we live in at the moment. And I spend a lot of time and a lot of reflection. I do a lot of reading into specific parts of it. There is an element of me filtering or searching for answers through the work. And I think that the answer to a crisis as complex as the one that we are in now can't, for me, come out of something which is figurative, which is something that we can already put into words. It comes out of something that is a lot more ephemeral and almost otherworldly. And that's what I find in abstract art. It is really the color colors and the movement and the shapes that are guiding. And my work is most real and beautiful when it feels like I have the least to do with it. When I've found a way to just like clear myself out of wanting it to be a certain way, or wanting the composition to go a certain way, or falling in love with a little detail and not wanting to touch it. It's just like, no, how do I find a way to just stay out and somehow become a channel for something that wants to come through? And once it has, I don't know what that is. I don't know who it's for, or I know that there's usually a connection to a topic or an incantation that's in my mind or something like that. That one over there is a bigger painting, is Together We Rise, and it's this idea of revolution, revolutions past or revolutions coming. But beyond that, I have no idea. It really feels like it's not mine anymore, and I'm not able to find that freedom and that lack of censorship in figurative work. It's the practice of figurative work that doesn't excite me. It doesn't seem as limitless.
I think it's interesting because it's pretty much the opposite of filmmaking, because whether or not the inspiration comes from something more ephemeral, you have to find a concrete way to, well, not put it down on the page, but you know what I mean? Like there's editing decisions to be made, and there's all the stuff that comes before it, the script, the shots, the everything. So it's like the most linear art possible to the most abstract art. I had read that you wrote that you believe that releasing stories into the world is an immense responsibility. Do you feel like it's the same kind of responsibility in terms of the potential impact when it comes to painting and film, or do you not see them as the same kind of vehicle for expression?
I suppose stories for me are stories, whether they're told through one medium or another. It's not that it doesn't make a difference. That's not true. They're just like different mediums. They have a different texture, they have a different feel, they have a different way of being processed. There is something for me about telling stories through visual arts, whether it's painting or what I'm working on now, which is more about an intermingling of a lot of different mediums to create an experience. They're all different facets of the same thing. And there is an element of feeling a little bit freer, as if I am able to explore topics and ideas and issues that are a lot closer to my heart through the art that I'm making now than I ever was through filmmaking. In the films that I made, there was always an element of thinking about audiences, of thinking about the potential financiers or buyers or broadcasters, the vehicle through which the film is going to make its way out into the world, and not necessarily responding to that, but also being aware, because we wanted to make films that were very much distributed in a traditional way. There are ways in which you can make film that is a lot more, exhibited in galleries or through sort of grassroots means that doesn't have to in any way respond to any kind of editorial constraints. And we're certainly lucky in the projects that we made that we weren't in that situation, but I believe the industry has changed hugely and drastically in the last few years. And most buyers, most broadcasters are very constrained in terms of the things that they can say, the things that they can show, the things that they can put out. And I think that's very much a response to this moment in time that we are in, where so many things are collapsing around us and they're just like topics that shouldn't be touched. And small teams of financiers behind these big distribution companies decide what audiences get to see and what they don't get to see on those bigger platforms. And that drives me crazy. And I don't feel those kind of, not shackles, that's very dramatic, but I don't feel that kind of censorship in art. I feel much, much freer to explore whatever I want and say whatever I want and be a lot more honest than I would be if I continued to make films.
And you said you're working on some new pieces now, right? You just had a solo exhibition. It sounds like you have another exhibition coming up sometime this year. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm trying to go against my instinct and not set a deadline, which is very, very hard because I'm someone who's like, I'm going to do it by then. And then I become obsessed with making it happen by then. I have a feeling that you probably resonate with that. But I'm trying to allow this one to move a lot more freely. It's a show in a way. After my exhibition in March, I went to the middle of nowhere in Tenerife, away from all tourists, from all humans, and just like spend these wonderful 10 days in the middle of nature on a bit of a retreat of my own. And I was reading a book at the time, and there was a couple of sentences out of that book that became like almost an incantation throughout that entire retreat. And this idea of what if the solution or the way out towards post-capitalist reality is as simple as going into nature and laying one's head to the ground and asking, how can I be of service? And there was something so beautiful in that idea that maybe it's not all of us coming together and trying to find solutions, but maybe it's us opening enough to the idea that maybe we don't have the solution and the solution is somewhere much bigger and more beautiful than we can imagine. And I came back and I just started painting and I started writing a lot and sketching a lot, and I started seeing all kinds of things. There's these video elements that are really sort of reflections and collections of different pieces of documentaries that I've watched, but they're also intermingled with moments of being in nature and a lot of like sound installations around that. Then there's a lot of sort of larger scale paintings immersed in that video work, along with a few sculptural pieces that I'm starting to work on now. Sort of this idea of the web of life and returning to being in response and in service of it and what that might look like, while also accepting and seeing the realities of the tragedies that are happening all over the world. In many ways, it's the culmination of 5 years of research. So that's why I'm trying to just let it be and not set a deadline. I initially set the deadline of September, October, but I'm allowing myself to open to that becoming a bit longer.
A lot of people who I've spoken to who are creative people are kind of wrestling with this feeling of, I used to make albums, I used to make films, I used to do plays, and now with all the stuff that's going on in the world, I don't know what to say. Like, it all just seems so big. What can I add to the world as a creative person in the face of what we're all facing on a global scale? And I know that you also offer mentoring sessions. In these mentoring sessions, does that kind of question come up a lot?
I just released that offering about a month ago. I started working with one beautiful woman, an artist from Detroit, and I think my hope was that it would be people who are maybe changing careers or doing something new or starting to look at their art practice and trying to find ways to grow it or change it. But really, it was also look at what I do, look at what I've done, and if there's anything I can do to help you with, I would love to do it. And I think that came from this place of a sort of reaction to the over monetization of creative endeavors, where I think so many artists are told, you should launch a course about this, you should launch a course about how you started your website, you should launch a course about how you did your first gallery show. I am so grateful that along the way, throughout my life, I met people who openly gave information and shared information and experience, and I have by no means figured it all out. It's just one little avenue that I've tried, for me is working, and if that can be helpful for you, please, I'm an open book. Let me know. I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much, Mara, for being with us today on the Metropolitan Culture Corner. Now you can check out Mara's projects with Vernon Films at vernonfilms.co.uk, and you can keep tabs on her visual art on her upcoming expositions at maraadina.com. See you next month, and thank you as always for tuning in and for supporting local art and culture.